The ducal carriage came up the Rookswood Lane, at the hour Verity had prayed it would not. Black lacquer flashing between the limes, the Ashworth crest burning gold on the door, and she understood, with her hand pressed flat to the warm glass of the morning-room window, that her husband had come himself to end their marriage. Not a solicitor, not a sealed packet by the post. Him, the Duke of Ashworth, had driven 2 days from town to set his own name to the annulment, and he did not know, could not know, that beneath the plain muslin of her summer gown she carried the one thing he had wanted from her above all others. The child had been certain to her only 9 days. She had counted, and counted again, in the grey before dawn, when the house was quiet enough to hear her own blood. 9 days of a secret she had told no one but the physician at Marlow, who did not know her married name, and thought her a widow. Now the carriage wheels ground the gravel to silence beneath her window, and the secret sat in her like a stone dropped down a well, falling still, no bottom yet found. Mrs. Pell, her voice came out steadier than she had any right to. His Grace's carriage is in the drive. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway, flower to the wrist, and looked past Verity's shoulder to the great black thing gleaming in the July light. So it is. Mrs. Pell wiped her hands slowly on her apron, one finger at a time, and him not sending a boy ahead to warn a body, so we might at least have got the good cups down. A duke can cross 3 counties but not spare a farthing for the post. There's breeding for you. Bring the good cups. Verity turned from the window. Her knees had a strange looseness in them, and she locked them, the way she had learned to lock them across a ballroom, under the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. And do not, Mrs. Pell, do not tell him anything about my health. The older woman's gaze sharpened, quick as a needle finding cloth. For one dreadful moment Verity thought she knew. But Mrs. Pell only pressed her lips and said, I've never in my life told a gentleman more than he'd paid to hear, my lady. I shan't begin with that one. Outside, the carriage step came down with a clash of iron. A footman in Ashworth blue handed down nothing, for the Duke wanted no hand. He came out of the carriage the way he did everything, without hurry, without noise, as though the ground ought to be grateful. The sun caught him full. He had grown leaner in the 4 months since she had last stood in a room with him, and browner, as if he had been riding hard and long, the dark coat pulled taut across shoulders that had once made her forget, on their wedding morning, every clever thing she had meant to say. Verity stepped back from the glass before he could look up and find her watching. She had time, the length of the hall, the opening of the door, the removal of his gloves, to decide who she would be. She chose the woman she had been raised to be by a father, who read Greek at the breakfast table, and taught his daughter that a calm question was worth more than a shouted truth. She smoothed the muslin over her waist, where nothing yet showed, and went down to meet the man who had come to unmarry her. He was standing in the center of the small square hall when she reached the turn of the stair, and the house seemed to have shrunk around him. Rookswood was a plain gentleman's box. 6 rooms, a kitchen garden, a single good staircase of Spanish oak that her grandfather had been proud of. The Duke of Ashworth filled the hall as a portrait fills its frame, and looked about him once, at the faded runner and the jar of blown roses on the side table, with an expression she could not read, and had never once been able to read. Verity, he said. Only that, her Christian name, in that low, unhurried voice that gave nothing away and never had. No your grace between them, there had not been, not since the church. Your grace. She came down the last 3 steps, with her hand light on the rail. You have had a long road. You will want tea before we speak of your business. I did not come for tea. No. She reached the flags of the hall and stopped an arm's length from him, close enough to see the fine dust of the road still caught in his lashes, the shadow along his jaw where he had not been shaved since the last inn. Close enough to catch, under the road dust, the particular scent of him, cedar and clean linen, and something beneath it that was only him. That 4 months apart had not let her forget. Her heart performed its small, treacherous stumble. She ignored it. But you will have it regardless, because Mrs. Pell has already carried the good cups into the parlor, and she is 71, and I will not have her carry them out again untouched. This way. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The Duke of Ashworth did not smile, but a flicker, quickly gone, as though her plainness had reached him before he had braced against it. You have not changed, he said. I have changed a very great deal. She turned toward the parlor, so he would not see her face when she said it. You have simply never watched long enough to notice. Mind the low beam. He did not mind the low beam. She heard the dull sound of his brow meeting the old oak, and the short exhalation of a man too proud to curse, and she permitted herself, walking ahead of him into the sunlit parlor, the smallest curve of her mouth, the first honest thing she had felt all morning. The parlor took the southern light at this hour, and it lay in long warm bars across the worn turkey carpet, catching the steam that rose from the good cups. Bees worked the honeysuckle at the open window. The whole room smelled of it, and of beeswax, and of the lavender Mrs. Pell laid in the linen press 2 doors down. Verity sat, and arranged her skirts, and poured, because pouring gave her hands something to do that was not pressing themselves to her middle. The Duke did not sit. He stood at the window with his back half to her, looking out at the kitchen garden where the runner beans climbed their poles, and a thrush was busy among the currant nets. He had a folded packet of papers in his hand. She had known he would. She poured his tea the way he took it. No sugar, no milk. A barbarous habit she had teased him for exactly once, in the 3 weeks of their marriage that had contained any teasing at all, and set the cup on the table at his elbow, and waited. My uncle drew these up, he said at last, without turning. You will find them fair. More than fair. The settlement returns your marriage portion in full, with interest at 4%, and adds a jointure of $800 a year, which is a great deal of money to pay a woman for having been a mistake. That turned him. His eyes, grey, the flat cool grey of the sea under cloud, came round to her, and for a moment the practiced smoothness of his face cracked. Just at the edges. Just enough. That is not what this is. Is it not? She kept her hands folded in her lap. Then you must explain it to me slowly, Your Grace, for I am only a country parson's daughter, and I confess the finer points of unmaking a marriage escape me. We stood in your family chapel in March. Your own chaplain, read the words. I have the ring still, in a drawer upstairs, because I could not think what else to do with it. And now your uncle has found some clever Latin, by which none of that happened at all. Which is it? Did we marry, and you regret it? Or did we never marry, and I have been living these 4 months as a duchess by mistake? Verity, because I should like to know, she went on, and her voice did not rise, would not rise. Her father had taught her that the quietest voice in the room is the one everyone leans in to hear. Whether the child who curtsied to me in the village last week and called me Your Grace was making a fool of herself. She is 6. I should not like her to have been made a fool of. The Duke set down the papers on the sill. He picked up the tea she had poured, and held it, and did not drink it, and she watched his knuckles whiten by a degree around the delicate handle. The marriage was valid, he said. It is being dissolved on grounds of a defect in the license. My uncle has found that the special license named the wrong parish. It is a technicality. It is also entirely sufficient. He spoke each word as though laying a brick. I did not come to pretend it never happened. I came because you deserved to hear it from me, and not from a man of business, and because I will not do to you what my father did to. He stopped, his jaw set. It does not signify, but it did. She had reached, in 4 months of marriage, and 4 months of silence, exactly once into the locked cupboard of Ashworth family history, and had her fingers rapped for it. She knew only the shape of the thing, that his father had cast off Nathaniel's mother in all but name, kept her in the north like an unpaid bill, and that the Duke had grown up in the cold current of it, and had sworn, She had heard it from his aunt, not from him. Never to keep a wife he could not love in the manner she was owed. She had thought, in March, that she might be the one he learned to love. She had been wrong, and the wrongness had very nearly unmade her, and she had come to Rookswood to put herself back together in private, with her Greek and her garden and her grandfather's staircase. And then, 9 days ago, the world had rearranged itself entirely, and she had not yet told a single living soul. "You have not touched your tea," she said. He looked down at the cup as if he had forgotten he held it. Then, deliberately, he drank, one swallow, exact, the way he did all things, and set it down, and she saw that the ordinary domestic act had cost him something, that he had not wanted to sit in this warm honeysuckle-scented room and drink tea a wife had poured him on the morning he ended her. "Where do I sign?" she asked. The question caught him off his guard. She saw it. He had braced, perhaps, for tears, or for pleading, or for the cold fury he must think her capable of. She did not know what picture of her he carried, whether it bore any resemblance to the woman in the chair. "You would sign them. Now, you have driven 2 days. I imagine you would like to drive back." She held out her hand for the papers, and was proud, fiercely proud, that it did not shake. "I have no wish to keep you from your life, your grace. Give them to me, and I will read them. And if your uncle's Latin is as fair as you say, I will put my name to it before your tea has cooled." For a long moment, he only looked at her. The thrush sang in the current nets. Somewhere below, Mrs. Pell dropped a pan and said something to the scullery girl that carried up faintly through the boards. The bars of sunlight crept a half-inch across the carpet. "No," the Duke said. Verity's outstretched hand did not waver, but something in her chest went very still. "No? I will not have it said that I put a pen in your hand within 10 minutes of coming through your door and drove off with the ink still wet." He turned fully from the window now, and the light was behind him, and she could not see his face. Only the broad dark shape of him against the summer garden. "You will read them properly. You will have your own man look them over. I will pay for him. And you will take the 3 days I am obliged to remain in this county in any case. Because the license must be surrendered to the bishop at Marlow, and he is from home until Thursday. I have taken rooms at the Ashworth Arms in the village. It seems I own it. I did not know that until this morning. You own a great many things you do not know about." She lowered her hand at last. "It is one of your charms." Verity. Now he did cross the room, 3 strides, no more, and the small parlour gave him no distance to cover. And suddenly he was near enough that she had to tilt her chin to hold his eyes, near enough that she caught cedar and road dust, and the warmth coming off him after 2 days shut in a carriage. Her whole traitor body leaned a half-degree toward him before she caught it. "I am trying," he said, low, "to do one decent thing. Let me." And after Thursday, she rose, because she would not be loomed over, and standing brought her closer still, so close she could see the pulse at his collar. "After the bishop has his license, and I have my 800 a year. What then, your grace? Do you go back to town and forget you ever spent 3 weeks married to a parson's daughter who reads Sophocles at you across the breakfast things?" No, the word came out rough. He looked, for one unguarded instant, like a man holding a door shut against a great deal of weather. "After Thursday, I am to marry Lady Honoria Vane." The name landed in the sunlit room like a stone through the window. Verity did not move. She had spent a lifetime learning not to move at the moment a blow arrives. Her father used to say that the Ashworths of the world read a flinch the way a hawk reads a hare. So she stood, and she breathed, and she felt the floor of the well inside her give way at last, the secret dropping and dropping. "Lady Honoria," she repeated, and was astonished at how ordinary her voice sounded. "The Marquess of Bedminster's daughter. Yes, she is 19. She is 20. A muscle moved in his jaw. "It is arranged. It has been arranged since before. It was arranged in the spring, by our families, and I could not honourably withdraw once your once this business made it possible again. Bedminster's estates march with mine along the whole of the Cheddar Valley. And she is. He stopped himself. But she heard the shape of the sentence he had not finished, and it was worse for being unfinished. And she is young and biddable, and will give the house an heir without asking me to love her. An heir. She pressed her hand. She could not help it, could not have stopped it if the room had been full of hawks, flat to the front of her gown, just below the waist, where 9 days of certainty lived and grew. His grey eyes followed the movement, and for one heart-stopping instant she thought the whole of it must be written plain across her face, that a man clever enough to unmake a marriage with a Latin technicality must surely see the child in the way she stood. But he saw only a woman with her hand at her stomach, and he had the grace, or the cowardice, to look away. "You want an heir," Verity said softly. "Every man in my position wants an heir." He had gone to the window again. His voice came back to her over his shoulder, flat and final. "It is the one thing the position requires, and the one thing—" He did not finish that either. "It does not signify. I am sorry, Verity, truly. You will be free by Thursday, and rich enough to please yourself, and I will trouble you no more than the law obliges." Behind him, unseen, she opened her mouth to tell him. The words were there. There will be an heir. There already is. 3 months from now she would not be able to hide it from a soul. And here he stood, the father of it, near enough to touch. Near enough that a single sentence would tear his neat arrangement to rags and put a vain girl of 20 out of a duke and a duchy in one breath. She had only to speak. Every particle of her wanted to speak, to fling the truth at that broad, indifferent back, and watch it turn him around. And then she thought, he will believe I am telling him to keep him. He would look at her hand on her waist, and her grandfather's shabby staircase, and her 800 a year, and he would see a parson's daughter who had produced a child at the precise, convenient hour to trap a duke she could not otherwise hold, and whatever softening she had glimpsed at the low beam, whatever ghost of the man she had married in March, would close over like water over a stone. He had sworn never to keep a wife out of obligation. She would not be kept out of obligation. She would rather raise the child alone at Rookswood, with her Greek and her garden, than be a debt the Duke of Ashworth paid for the rest of his life. She closed her mouth. "Thursday, then," she said. He turned at the door, one gloved hand on the frame, and looked back at her across the warm, bright room with its steam and its bees and its bars of falling light. Looked at her a moment longer than the parting wanted, as though there were a thing he had meant to say and had mislaid somewhere between town and here. Whatever it was, he did not say it. Thursday, the Duke agreed, and ducked the low beam this time, and was gone down her grandfather's good oak stair. Verity stood in the empty parlour until she heard the carriage take the lane. Then she crossed to the window and pressed both hands flat to the front of her gown and watched the last flash of black lacquer vanish between the limes toward a village she had just learned her husband owned, carrying away a man who had come all this way to give her up, and who had ridden off without the faintest idea that he was leaving behind the only thing he had ever truly wanted. 3 days, she said aloud, to the bees, to the honeysuckle, to the child no bigger than a folded secret. We have 3 days to decide what to do with them. Below, a cup rattled onto its saucer, and Mrs. Pell's voice floated up the stairwell, dry as August. "If it's deciding you're after, my lady, you'll decide it better with something in your stomach." He drank his tea and never touched the seed cake. "There's a duke for you, crosses 3 counties and won't eat. I'll bring it up." Verity laughed, a short, cracked, astonished sound she did not know she had in her, and put the back of her hand to her mouth and found that it came away wet, and could not for the life of her have said whether she was laughing still, or something very near its opposite. Out on the lane the dust settled slowly in the heavy summer air, and did not tell her what to do. The seed cake came up on the good plate, and Verity ate 2 slices of it standing at the window. Because sitting down felt too much like the beginning of a long stillness, she did not trust herself to leave. The cake was dense with caraway, and still warm at its heart, and it steadied her the way plain food does when the world has just tilted. Below, the runner beans nodded on their poles. The thrush had won its argument with the current nets, and gone. "You'll want to read his uncle's cleverness before you sign a line of it," Mrs. Pell said, gathering the untouched cup the Duke had drunk from, and turning it in the light as though checking for the mark of him. "Gentlemen who write in Latin are like men who lock a gate and leave the wall down. It's never the part they show you that does the harm. My father used to say very much the same thing." Verity set down the plate and took up the folded packet from the sill where he had left it. The paper was heavy, expensive, faintly cool. Only he said it of bishops. "Well, you've one of those to manage too, come Thursday." Mrs. Pell paused at the door with the tray. "Marlow. Is it? You'll not go to Marlow alone, my lady." The word Marlow went through Verity like a draught under a door. Marlow was where the bishop kept his palace and his registry. Marlow was also where, 9 days past, a tired physician with ink on his cuff had pressed his fingertips to her wrist and her throat and asked her a handful of quiet questions, and written in his daybook the name she had given him. Mrs. Weston, a widow, lately come to the district, and told her, kindly, that she might expect a child at the turn of the year. One town. One small assize town of perhaps 4 streets and a market cross. The bishop's clerk and the physician's daybook kept house not 200 yards apart. "I shall go with the carrier," she said, on the public day, like a sensible woman. Now let me read. The clauses were as fair as he had promised, and that was the first thing that frightened her. Her marriage portion returned in full. The jointure of 800 a year charged upon the Ashworth rents in Wiltshire, payable quarterly, without condition. A separate provision for the maintenance of Rookswood itself, so that she should never want for a roof. He had thought of everything a man could think of, who did not know the one thing there was to think of. She read it twice, her finger moving under the lines the way her father had taught her to read anything that mattered. Slowly, aloud in the mind, letting no easy sentence pass unweighed. And then, on the third sheet, in a smaller and different hand, she found the clause that had not come from the Duke. It sat among the recitals, dressed in the same dry Latin as the rest, but she had construed harder texts than this at 9 years old across the breakfast things. It provided that the settlement should be void. The whole of it, the portion and the jointure and the roof over her head, should it be shown at any time that the parties had, at the date of the pretended marriage, or thereafter, cohabited in such manner as might give rise to issue, save as should be declared and disposed of according to the direction of the trustees. Verity read it a 4th time, and the honeysuckle in the window seemed suddenly very loud with bees. Issue. Disposed of according to the direction of the trustees. Not the Duke's phrase. The Duke, whatever else he was, did not speak of a child as a thing to be directed. This was another man's hand entirely, and it told her, more plainly than anything Nathaniel had said in the parlour, that somewhere behind the black lacquer and the fair jointure there was a mind already turning over the very possibility she carried, not with hope, but with the cool foresight of a lawyer closing a gap in a wall. "Mrs. Pell," she said, and was pleased that her voice held. "Who came with his grace? Did you see the carriage set down anyone at the Arms? A footman and a driver and a valet, by the look." Mrs. Pell had not gone. She never quite went, when she thought she was needed, and a gentleman in a snuff-coloured coat, who rode alongside, and had a face like a Lady Day account. Thin, grey at the temple. "Wanted to know of the ostler, so Jem's boy tells me, whether the parson's daughter kept her own carriage or hired." Her mouth thinned, as if it were his affair how a lady goes about. "His name? Lord Edmund Ashworth," the boy said. "The Duke's uncle." Mrs. Pell shifted the tray against her hip. "Him that wrote your Latin, I'll wager." "Him that wrote my Latin," Verity agreed softly, and folded the papers along their crease, and knew, with the certainty that had woken her these last 9 mornings before the light, that her 3 quiet days were not going to be quiet at all. He came the next morning, before the dew was off the beans. Verity had risen early. She rose early always now, driven up out of sleep by a faint sea swell of the stomach that she had learned to ride out standing at the open casement with the cool air on her face, and so she was dressed, and downstairs, in the plain sprigged muslin that hid everything and betrayed nothing, when the knock came. Not the Duke's knock, a brisker thing, 3 raps, impatient of the wait. Lord Edmund Ashworth removed his hat in the little hall and looked about him exactly as his nephew had, but where the Duke's glance had been unreadable, the uncle's was an inventory. She watched him price the faded runner, the blown roses, the Spanish oak of the stair, and set each figure down in some private ledger, and arrive at a total that plainly did not impress. "Mrs. Weston," he said. The name struck her like a slap, and she gave no sign, none, though her heart lurched hard against her stays. Mrs. Weston, her widow's name. The name in the physician's book. She had one wild instant of certainty that the whole edifice had already fallen, and then she saw that he watched her too closely, that the name had been a cast line, a hook dropped to see what rose, and that he did not know at all. He was only a clever man fishing in dark water. "You mistake me, sir." She let a small, cool puzzlement into her face, the face her father had worn across the chessboard. "I am not aware that I have ever been Mrs. Weston. You will be Lord Edmund. Your nephew mentioned you drew the settlement. Will you come through? Mrs. Pell has the kettle on." Something flickered behind his eyes, annoyance perhaps that the hook had come up bare. He followed her into the parlour and did not sit until she did, and then only on the very edge of the chair, as a man sits who does not mean to stay long enough to warm it. "I shall be direct," he said. "It saves everyone's time, and yours cannot be so very full. It is fuller than you would suppose. But be direct. I find I prefer it in a Ashworth. Directness is so much rarer among you than one would expect from the price of your coats." His jaw tightened by a hair. "My nephew is a sentimental man beneath a cold manner. It is a family failing. His father had it, and it cost the family a great deal. Nathaniel has taken it into his head that he owes you a scene of farewell. 3 days of it. Tea and papers and gentle handling." He leaned forward. "I have come to spare you all of that. Sign today. I have brought a second copy, and a man to witness it. Sign today, take your carriage north to your people, and let the matter be closed before it can grow." Awkward, Verity poured, because her hands wanted the work of it. Now there is a word, doing a great deal of labour for its size. "Awkward how, my lord? You are a clever woman. You know how these things sour when they are drawn out. The Bedminster alliance has been 3 years in the arranging. The valley lands, the water rights, the 2 families' seats not 11 miles apart. It is the work of a generation, and it hangs, at this moment, upon a licence that named the wrong parish, and upon your good sense." He accepted no tea. He had come to conclude business, not to take refreshment from the hand of it. Lady Honoria's father is not a patient man. Every day that my nephew lingers in this county playing the penitent, Bedminster reads it in the London papers and wonders what he lingers for. You would not wish, I think, to be the cause of a coldness between 2 great houses. That would be a poor return for a jointure of £800. There it was, laid on the worn table between them, plain as the seed cake, the whole machine of it, and where she was meant to fit as a small removable part. Verity turned her cup a quarter circle on its saucer and let the silence stretch until he shifted in it. "You have written a curious clause into your Latin, my lord," she said. He did not blink. "I have written a great many clauses. Which curiosity troubles you? The one that speaks of issue, of a child that might be, and how it should be disposed of at the direction of the trustees. She lifted her eyes to his and held them, and made her voice as mild as milk. Your nephew did not mention that we were expecting to trouble the trustees. Yet you have gone to the labor of providing for it. That is a great deal of foresight to spend upon a thing you cannot believe likely. For the first time, the smooth grey face gave something up. Not much. A stillness where there had been ease. It is a standard provision, he said. One provides against every event, however remote, or one is not doing one's work. Is it standard? She smiled, and did not mean it, and knew he knew she did not. How reassuring. I had feared, for a moment, that you had come 3 counties with a particular question in your mind, and had dressed it up as a general one. But you say it is standard, and I am only a parson's daughter, and must take a lawyer at his word. Lord Edmund rose. He had got what he came to learn, which was that she would not be hurried, and he had learned in exchange something he had not meant to give, that the clause had frightened her, and that a frightened woman is a woman with something to lose. She saw him weigh it. She saw him decide to say no more, and to watch instead, which was worse. Sign by Thursday, he said, gathering his hat. For your own sake, madam, my nephew's kindness will not outlast the road home, whatever he believes this morning. A duke does not, in the end, marry down the second time when he has troubled to climb out of it the first. See that you are on the right side of the door when it closes. I shall see myself to the door with you, Verity said, since you know so well which side of it people belong on. She stood on her grandfather's step and watched him ride off down the lane, snuff-coloured against the green, and only when the last of him had gone between the limes did she let herself lean, just once, hard against the warm frame of the door, one hand flat to her middle, and breathe as though she had run a mile. He knew nothing. He suspected everything. It was, she thought, the more dangerous of the two. She did not sleep that night, or not much, and in the morning she did the thing she had told herself she would not do, which was walk down to the village. She told herself, it was for the post, she had a letter to send to her father's old friend Mr. Hallett, a plain honest attorney at Reading, who would read the Duke's Latin for her, without a coin's worth of interest in the answer. That much was true. She did not tell herself the other thing, the thing that walked beside her the whole warm half-mile, with the dust rising soft under her half-boots, and the July hedges loud with linnets, and the smell of hot elder-flower thick as syrup in the lane. She did not tell herself she wished to see him. She was not so great a fool as to say it even in the privacy of her own skull. The village of Ashworth Magna, she had lived beside it 4 months, and never once thought to learn that it bore his name, lay along a single street that widened at the market cross and narrowed again past the church. The Ashworth Arms stood at the wide part, timbered and white, with a new painted sign, and a very great deal of activity in its yard that had never been there before. Grooms, a second carriage, smaller than the ducal one, with the Bedminster arms upon the panel. Verity stopped in the shadow of the light gate with her letter in her hand, and understood, with a sinking that had nothing cowardly in it, and everything cold, that Lady Honoria Vane had come to see the country she was to have. She might have turned back. She thought about it for the length of a breath. Then she lifted her chin. Because a woman who turns back is a woman who has admitted there is something to turn back from, and she walked on to the post-house and gave in her letter and paid her penny, and came out into the street again, directly into the path of the Duke of Ashworth and his bride-to-be. He saw her first. She watched it happen, the ordinary summer street, the two of them come out from the inn-yard. Lady Honoria's gloved hand on his arm, and her pretty face turned up to say some pretty thing. And then his grey eyes found Verity across the 20 feet of sunlit dust, and everything in his face that had learned, over 30 years, to give nothing away, gave, for the briefest instant. Absolutely everything. She could not have named what she saw there. She only knew it was not indifference, and that the knowing was worse than indifference would have been. "Your Grace," she said, and curtsied, because there were eyes at every window. "Mrs." He stopped. There was no name he could use. Not Verity, Not before the girl on his arm, not the title that was being unmade in a bishop's registry. The Duke of Ashworth, who owned the ground they stood on, and the inn behind them, and the very church whose shadow fell across her, stood in the middle of his own village, and could not find a word to call his wife. It was Lady Honoria who filled the silence, and she did it prettily, and Verity could have wished her cruel, because cruelty would have been so much easier to bear. "You are one of his Grace's tenants?" the girl asked, with a smile of genuine warmth. She was very young and very lovely, dark-eyed, with the unhurried confidence of a person who has never once been made to wait for anything. "I am so pleased to meet the neighborhood. I mean to know everyone. Ashworth tells me nothing. He is the worst correspondent in England, so I must find it all out for myself." "Have you lived here long?" 4 months, Verity said. "I came in the spring. Then you came the same season I did, in a manner of speaking." Honoria laughed, quite unaware, and the sound was fresh and kind and went through Verity like a blade drawn slowly. "Isn't it a lovely country? All this green." "I told Papa I should not mind the quiet in the least." "It is very quiet," Verity agreed. "One hears everything, in the quiet. It is the great danger of the country. There is nothing to cover the sound of a thing arriving." She did not look at the Duke when she said it, but she felt him receive it, felt the words go past the girl, who heard only pleasant nonsense, and land square in the one man in the street who understood that they were not nonsense at all. "You have not given her ladyship your name," he said. His voice was perfectly even. Only she would have heard the effort, the evenness, cost. "No," Verity said. "I have not." And she smiled at Lady Honoria, a real smile, because none of this was the girl's doing, and it would be a poor sort of woman who made her pay for it. "Forgive me, it is a plain one, and easily forgotten. I hope you will be very happy here, my lady. The house takes the morning light beautifully. Ask them to open the east rooms in summer. They have kept them shut for years, and it is a waste of a good sun." She inclined her head to the Duke. "Your Grace, I must not keep you. I have a carrier to catch on the Marlow Road." That reached him too. Marlow. She saw the word take hold, saw him remember what waited at Marlow, the bishop, the surrender of the license, the last brick of the wall, and something crossed his face that she could not read and had never been able to read, and she turned and walked away up the street before it could resolve into anything she would have to carry home. "That was neatly done," said a dry voice at her elbow, and she turned to find Mrs. Pell fallen into step beside her, with a basket of fish on her arm, and an expression of vast and terrible innocence, walking straight into the pair of them. "If I'd planned it for you, I couldn't have set it better. You'll have given that child something to puzzle over the length of her drive home. I did not plan it. No, that's why it worked." Mrs. Pell shifted the basket. "He looked at you like a man looking at a lit window from out in the cold, my lady, and she looked at you like a girl who has never once in her life been cold and doesn't know the window's lit. There's your whole trouble in a street corner, if you'd asked me, which you didn't." They walked a little way in silence, the dust warm through Verity's boots, the hedgerows sweet and loud. "He owns the fish too, I shouldn't wonder," Mrs. Pell added. "Owns the water they swam in, owns half the sky by the look of that inn yard, and can't put a name to the one woman in the county he stood up in a church and married. There's Jukes for you." She sniffed. "I'll say this. He came himself. Whatever else. A lesser man sends the snuff-coloured uncle and stops away clean. That one came and looked at you like the window, and can't for his life work out why the coming has made it worse instead of better. He'll be 3 more days working it out, and he hasn't the wit for it, poor gentleman, though he's a fair head for a mortgage." Verity laughed despite herself, the caraway and cracked sound of yesterday, and it steadied her again as the seed cake had. They came up the lane to Rookswood, with the sun climbing toward noon, and the beans throwing short shadows, and it was not until they reached the gate that Verity saw the second horse tethered in the shade of the limes, and the man standing on her own step, with his hat in his hand, waiting. Not the uncle, not the Duke. A stranger in sober black, with a leather case beneath his arm, and the particular patient stillness of a man accustomed to sitting at bedsides. "Mrs. Weston?" he said, coming down the step toward her, and his voice was gentle, and his face was the face of the tired physician, with ink on his cuff, who had pressed his fingertips to her wrist 9 days ago at Marlow. "Forgive the liberty. I was called to a confinement at the Grange this side of the county, and thought, you gave me some concern at our meeting, and you had not come back as I bade you, and your direction was easy enough to find once I asked after a widow lately come." He smiled, kindly, entirely without suspicion, entirely without the least idea what he carried in his innocent black case. "I only wish to satisfy myself that you and the child do well. May I come in?" And behind her, from the shade of the limes, a second voice even, unhurried, giving nothing away and never had, said, "The child?" Verity turned. The Duke of Ashworth stood in the lane not 10 feet off, his own horse's rein loose in his hand, come after her from the village with God knew what half-formed words still unspoken on his tongue, and on his face now, plain as it had never once been plain in 4 months of marriage, the dawning of a thing she had crossed 9 days and one smaller-sized town to keep from him. For the length of one breath, no one in the lane moved. The linnets went on in the hedge. A bee bumbled fat and slow against the warm stone of the gatepost. The physician stood halfway down the step with his kind, tired face still arranged for kindness, his black case under his arm, entirely unaware that he had just laid a lit match to a room full of dry straw. "The child," the Duke said again, not a question this time. He came off the grass verge into the sun, and his horse threw up its head at the change in his hand on the rein, and he steadied it without looking, the way he did all things, exactly, without waste. His grey eyes had not left her. "Verity, Your Grace." Her voice came from very far off, from the calm, cold place her father had built in her against exactly such a moment as this, though he could never have imagined this one. "You have ridden after me. You will forgive me. I have a caller. You have too." He stopped at the gate. He did not open it. His gloved hand closed over the top bar of it, and the old wood, which her grandfather had split and hung himself, took the weight of a duke as it had taken the weight of 40 years of parish children swinging on it. "Sir?" "You have the advantage of me. You attend this lady?" The physician's glance went from the Duke's face to Verity's and back, and something in the quality of the air reached him at last, some warning in the stillness, and his professional ease faltered. Yes, that is. I had the honor of attending Mrs. Weston at Marlow 9 days since. I came only to satisfy myself of her continued." He stopped. He had caught it now, fully, the wrongness. He looked at Verity in open apology. A man who feels a flaw give beneath him and cannot tell whose flaw it is. "I beg your pardon. Have I? Is there some, Mrs. Weston?" The Duke repeated, low. The name went into him, and something behind his eyes rearranged around it, quick and terrible. The mind that had unmade a marriage with a scrap of misnamed Latin, turning now upon a widow's name, and a physician on a country step, and finding, in half a heartbeat, the shape of the whole. "You are not a widow." "No," Verity said. "You gave this man a false name." "I gave him a name that let me be examined in a strange town, without its being told in 3 days across 2 counties that the Duchess of Ashworth had gone to a physician." She kept her chin level. The dust was warm through her boots, and the elderflower hung sweet and thick and sickening in the heat, and she thought she might, after all, be ill in her own front lane before her husband, and a stranger both. She was not. She had learned to lock her knees under 100 pairs of eyes. She could lock her stomach under 3. "Sir, you meant only kindness, and you have done none of us any harm. Mrs. Pell will give you tea in the kitchen." "Please, the housekeeper was already there." the fish basket set down God knew when, her flower and needle sharpness gone very quiet and very watchful. "This way, sir," she said, and it was not a request, and the physician, glad past speaking to be given a wall to step behind, went with her, and the low door of Rookswood took them in and shut, which left the two of them, and the horse, and the gate her grandfather had hung, and 4 months of silence with the bottom fallen out of it. The Duke opened the gate. He came through it into her small garden, where the runner beans nodded on their poles, and the currants hung red in their nets, and he stopped an arm's length from her, and she saw that his hand, the one that had held the gate, was not perfectly steady, and that he had seen her see it, and that he despised it. "How long?" he said. "Nathaniel, how long have you known? Still even?" Still that low, unhurried voice that gave nothing away. But she had lived beside it, and she heard now what she had never heard in it before, a fault line under the flat grey surface, a thing straining. "You will tell me the truth, since it appears I have had 4 months of the other kind." "How long?" 9 days. She would not lie to him. It was the one thing left she would not do. "It was certain to me 9 days ago. I told no one. I have told no one still, save a physician who thought me a widow named Weston and did not know my face." 9 days. His jaw worked. He looked past her at the plain white box of a house, the blown roses, the whole shabby modest sum of her life here, and she watched him do the arithmetic, watched him arrive, exactly as she had feared he would arrive, at the ugliest possible total. 9 days. "And yesterday you sat in that room, and poured my tea, and asked me where you were to sign. And you knew. You sat there, carrying and you let me tell you of Honoria, of the arrangement, of the heir. You let me say the word heir to your face. And you knew. And you said nothing." "Yes," Verity said. "Why?" It came out of him rough, torn up from somewhere the smooth voice did not usually reach. "In God's name, Verity, why would you sit and let me? What were you playing at? What is the game?" And there it was, laid in the warm, bright garden between the beanpoles, the very word she had known he would find. Game, she had seen it come, 2 days off, when she stood in the parlour with her hand at her waist and made herself close her mouth. She had known that if he learned it wrong, learned it after, learned it from a physician on a doorstep instead of from her own lips in her own time, this was the face he would show her, the face of a man who has spent 30 years watching for the trap in every soft thing. "There is no game," she said. "You hid a child from me." He said it slowly, as though laying each brick, as he had laid the bricks of the settlement. "My child, the heir He stopped. His hand had come up, half toward her, and he arrested it and let it fall. "You hid the one thing. You let me stand in your parlour and give it all away. The name, the title, the whole of it, to Honoria, to Bedminster's water rights. You let me set the pen in your own hand for it. And the entire while you carried the thing that would have." His breath went out of him. "You would have let me marry her. You would have stood in that street this morning and wished her joy of my east rooms, and let me marry a girl of 20 and get an heir upon her, when there was one already. When there was, he could not finish it." For the first time in 4 months the Duke of Ashworth could not finish a sentence, and the failure of it was more dreadful to her than any completed cruelty. "Yes," Verity said, "I would have let you. Then you are." He looked at her as though she had turned, in the space of one summer morning, into a stranger wearing his wife's plain sprigged muslin. "I do not know what you are. I am the woman you came here to unmarry." Her voice did not rise. It would not rise. Her father across the chessboard, the quietest voice in the room. "I am the woman whose name you could not find in your own village street 2 hours ago. You stood before your bride with the ground I stand on under your boots, and the church I married you in at your back, and you could not call me anything at all. And you ask me why I did not hand you a further weapon." A weapon. His head went back a fraction, as at a blow. "A child?" is a weapon to you? A child is a child. Now, only now, did something crack in the calm, and she let it, one hairline, because he had earned the sight of it. But you would not have seen a child, Nathaniel. You would have seen exactly what you are seeing now. A parson's daughter who found herself carrying a duke's heir at the precise, convenient hour her marriage was to be dissolved, and who chose that hour, of all the hours in the year, to make it known. You would have looked at my grandfather's staircase, and my 800 a year, and my 4 months of silence, and you would have called it a trap. You are calling it a trap. You have been in this garden the length of a psalm, and you have already found the word for it. Game, you found it before you found my name. He went white about the mouth, because it was true, and he was not, for all his coldness, a stupid man, and he knew it was true. That is not, he began. Is it not? She held his eyes. Then tell me, your grace, if I had spoken yesterday, if I had put down the teapot and said, there will be no annulment, for there is already an heir, what would you have thought of me? Not felt, thought, in that cold, clever part of you that named the wrong parish and voided a marriage. What would it have made of a wife who produced a child at the last possible moment to keep a duke she could not otherwise hold? The silence stretched. A bean leaf turned over in the small, hot breath of wind off the field. Somewhere behind the low kitchen window, a cup was set down with great and deliberate softness, as though someone within had determined to make no sound at all, and was failing. I would have thought, he said at last, and it came out of him like a stone pulled from deep water, that you had trapped me. Yes, but you did not speak. You said nothing. You would have let me go. He was staring at her now, with something new struggling up under the anger, something that frightened her more than the anger had. You would have let me marry her, and lost the title, the house, you had a clause, Verity, my uncle's clause. You read it, I know you read it. The settlement voids if there is issue. You knew that. You sat with the papers, and you knew that if you said one word you kept everything, and if you kept silent you might lose the very roof, and you chose. I chose the roof I could keep without being owed for it, she said. Yes, and that was the thing that undid him. She saw it go into him, saw the whole architecture he had built in the last 5 minutes, the trap, the game, the scheming parson's daughter. She saw it shudder and fail to stand. Because a scheming woman speaks, a scheming woman uses the clause, a scheming woman does not sit silent and let a duke walk off with her secret still folded under her heart. He had come into this garden certain of who she was. He no longer had the first idea. She watched him lose it, and she took no pleasure in it, none at all, though she had told herself for 9 days that she would. Then why, he said, very low, did you keep it from me? If not to trap me, if not to keep everything, why keep it at all? She could have told him. The truth stood ready, as it had stood ready 2 days ago in the parlor. Because I would not be a debt you paid. Because you swore never to keep a wife out of obligation, and I would sooner raise the child alone than be the obligation. Because I loved you in March, and you never once watched long enough to notice. And I will not be loved now by accident. Because a physician came to a doorstep. It was all there. It would have turned him, she thought. It might have turned him entirely. She did not say it. Because the saying of it was the last thing she owned that he had not already taken or unmade, and she would choose the hour of its spending herself, and the hour was not this one. In a hot garden, with a physician drinking tea behind the wall, and a girl of 20 waiting at his inn. Because it was mine, she said. 9 days of something that was only mine, in a life where nothing else has been. You may have the rest of it, your grace. You have taken the name and the title and the marriage. You will not have the reason. Not today. He looked at her a long moment. The sun stood almost at noon. Their shadows had drawn in close about their feet. The whole garden hummed and ripened, and paid them no mind at all. I cannot marry her, he said. It was not what she had braced for. She had braced for the cold reassembly, the retreat behind the flat grey face, the Duke recovering himself and speaking of trustees. Not this. Not the low, plain, half-wondering statement of a man saying aloud a thing he has only just that instant understood. You are contracted to her, Verity said. I am married to you. He said it as though the fact had been mislaid and newly found, as though he were turning it over in the light the way Mrs. Pell had turned his cup. There is no annulment, Verity. There cannot be. Now, my uncle's own clause. Issue voids it. If there is a child of the marriage was consummated in the eye of any court in England, wrong parish or no. The license does not signify against a living. He stopped himself off the word, as he always did, and she wondered, distantly, whether he even knew he did it, whether some old wound taught him to step around it. Against a child. He built the wall, and he left a door in it he did not see. You saw it. You read it 4 times, I would wager. And you saw the door. And you meant to walk through it into a life of raising my heir alone at the bottom of my county, and never telling me it drew breath. Yes, Verity said. That was the plan. It is a monstrous plan. It is the plan of a woman who was given no better one. For the first time her voice bent, just at the end, just enough that she despised it. You gave me 800 a year, and a wrong parish, and a girl of 20. I gave myself the one thing I could take without your leave. Do not stand in my garden and call it monstrous, Nathaniel. You have not yet earned the standing to name what I do monstrous. The kitchen door opened. Mrs. Pell came out onto the step, with her spine very straight, and her face very smooth, and behind her the physician, hat in hand, his tea plainly abandoned half-drunk, a man desiring above all things to be gone from a house where the heir had gone to iron. The gentleman must ride on to his confinement at the Grange, my lady Mrs. Pell said, into the garden, to Verity, as though the Duke of Ashworth were not standing 6 feet off in the middle of the beans. He asks me to say he's satisfied you and thee, that you do well, and he begs your pardon for the liberty, and he'll trouble you no further. A small pause, weighted like lead shot. He's a discreet man, he says. I believe him. Discretion's the one thing a country doctor has to sell, and he'll not spend his stock on the first duke to frown at him. Thank you, sir, Verity said to the physician, past her husband. You meant only good. It has done no harm that was not going to come regardless. And it was true. And she watched the man take the small mercy of it, and bow and go to his tired horse under the limes, and mount and ride, and be gone down the lane into the shimmer of the noon. The last person, she thought, who would treat her these 3 days as a simple thing, a widow to be looked after. After him there would only be the machine, and where she fit in it. She was right sooner than she knew. The Duke did not go. He walked the physician to the gate with his eyes, and then he turned back to her, and she saw him gather himself, saw the flat grey composure come down over the raw thing like a shutter over a lit window. Mrs. Pell's window. The lit window, she thought, and nearly laughed the cracked laugh again, and did not, and he was the Duke of Ashworth once more, and something had changed, and nothing had. You will come to the Arms, he said. This afternoon. There are things that must be said that cannot be said between bean rows with your housekeeper, counting my faults through the window. I count them myself. Your Grace, Mrs. Pell observed to the middle distance. I don't need a window. I will not come to the Arms, Verity said. Your bride is at the Arms. I will not sit in a private parlour of an inn you own, while the girl you are contracted to takes the country air in the yard, and have it told across the county by tea-time that the parson's daughter would not let the Duke go without a scene. You may say to me here what must be said. This is my garden and my grandfather's gate, and I stand better here than anywhere in England. He inhaled. He was not, she thought, a man much used to being refused twice in one morning by the same woman, and never in his life, she would wager, by a woman with flower dust nowhere on her, and no rank to her name, and her hand not quite steady at her side. Very well. He looked at her a moment. Not here, then, and not the arms. There is a church. My church, God help me, I own the living. It is empty on a Tuesday, and it is cool, and it is 100 yards from any ear. Meet me in it at 4. Bring your grandfather's courage, since you set such store by his gate. And something almost turned up the corner of his mouth, the ghost of the flicker she had seen at the low beam, gone before it formed. I have a great many faults, Verity. I will not add to them by shouting the truth of your condition across a kitchen garden. 4 o'clock. The church. He did not wait for her yes. He went out through the gate and did not shut it, and swung up onto his horse with the ease of a man who had learnt to ride before he learned to guard his face, and was gone up the lane the way the physician had gone, toward the village he owned and the girl who waited in it, and Verity stood in her ruined garden with the gate swinging on her grandfather's hinges, and understood that the quiet had ended, that there was no putting the secret back down the well, that the water had given it up, and that at 4 o'clock in a cold empty church 100 yards from any ear she would have to decide, at last, what to do with the truth now that it was no longer hers to keep. The church, Mrs. Pell said, coming down off the step to shut the gate against the lane, since no one else would. He'll marry you again in it, if he's any sense, and end the whole sorry Latin, which he hasn't, being a duke. Sense, I mean. He's every other thing. She latched the gate and stood looking down the empty lane, where the dust hung gold in the heat. You'll eat before you go. I'll not send you into a cold church at 4 to fence with that one on an empty stomach and you carrying. There's the cold fowl and the last of the seed cake. She turned. Her sharp old eyes went over Verity once, top to toe, and softened by a degree she would afterward deny. You did well by the doctor, my lady. And you did well by the girl in the street. That wasn't easy. It's only yourself you've been hard on, and that's the one you'll not take advice about. So I'll save my breath for the stairs. Verity did not go in at once. She stood a while longer among the beans, with her hand flat to the front of her gown, and let the July sun lie warm across the top of her head, and listened to the linnets take up their argument again now that the iron had gone out of the air, and tried to think, and could not, for the single sentence going round and round in her, he cannot marry her now. She had built 4 months of solitude and 9 days of secrecy on the certainty that he would go, that he would marry Honoria Vane and the water rights and get his biddable heir, and that she would raise her own child alone and unowed at the bottom of his county. She had made her peace with it. It had been a hard, cold, whole peace, and she had earned it, and in the space of one physician's kindness it had come apart in her hands. He could not marry Honoria. The clause would not let him. His own uncle's wall had a door in it, and the door had opened, and through it she could see nothing at all. Not a life alone, which she had prepared for, and not a life with him, which she had forbidden herself to want, but only a churning dark, a thing directed by trustees, a thing arranged between great houses over her head, as everything in her marriage had been arranged over her head. And Lord Edmund. She lifted her head at that. Lord Edmund did not yet know. But Lord Edmund had come to a doorstep with the name Mrs. Weston already on his tongue, had gone fishing in dark water a full day before a physician ever climbed her step, and a man who fishes so early is a man who will not be long in learning what has risen. When he learned it, he would not stand in a garden and lose the architecture of his certainties, as his nephew had. He would build a new architecture, quickly, and it would have a place in it for a parson's daughter and her inconvenient child, and the place would be small and removable, and disposed of according to the direction of the trustees. She went in then, because Mrs. Pell was right that she must eat, and because a woman who is to fence in a cold church at 4 does it better fed, and because standing in the sun would not tell her what the church would have to. She ate the cold fowl she did not want at the parlour table, where she had poured his tea, and she read Lord Edmund's clause a fifth time by the window's light. And this time she read it the way her father had taught her to read the thing that mattered most, not for what it said, but for what its maker feared. And what its maker feared, plain under the dry Latin, was a living child of the marriage. The whole clause was built against that one event. He had provided for issue not because it was standard, whatever he claimed, but because he had lain awake somewhere in his snuff-coloured certainty, and thought, what if there is a child? And it undoes everything. He had thought it before she had known it herself. He had come 3 counties with the fear already dressed as foresight. Which meant, she thought, setting down her fork, that the clause was not a wall built to keep her out. It was a trap built to spring on the child, disposed of according to the direction of the trustees. She had read it 4 times as a thing that threatened her jointure. She read it now as what it truly was, and the cold fowl turned to ash on her tongue, and she pressed her hand flat and hard to her middle, as though she could put herself between the folded secret and the dry, clever Latin that had been lying in wait for it before it was ever conceived. At 3:30 she put on her bonnet. "You'll take the shawl, Mrs. Pell said, at the door, holding it out, the good one, the Norwich silk, the one thing of any value Verity had brought from her father's house. It's July out, but that church holds February in its stones all year round. I've buried folk out of it and christened them into it, and I never once came out of it warm." And the old woman's hand caught Verity's sleeve and held it, and for once there was no dryness in her at all. "Whatever he says to you in there, my lady, whatever's offered, or threatened, or bargained, you come home and sleep on it before you set your name to a syllable of it. There's nothing that can't wait a night that's worth doing at all. Your father'd tell you the same, God keep him, and he'd say it in Greek to make it stick." "He would say," Verity said, "nothing in excess. He said it of everything from claret to grief." She let the shawl be settled about her shoulders, and let herself, for one moment, be an old woman's care, since it might be the last simple hour she had. "I will sleep on it, Mrs. Pell. I promise you that much. I have not slept on a great many things in my life, and I have regretted most of them." She went out into the afternoon. The heat had thickened. Thunder sat somewhere behind the downs, a bruise on the southern sky, and the elderflower in the lane had gone from syrup to something heavier, and the linnets had fallen quiet the way they do before weather. She walked the half-mile with her grandfather's courage, as the Duke had bidden her, and with her father's, and with her hand more than once at her middle, and she came to the church of Ashworth Magna, as the tower clock ground toward 4, and found the great south door standing open on its cool dark, like a mouth. She did not go in at once. She stood in the porch, where the banns were read and the dead were rested, and the living married, and she looked at the worn stone, and the notice board with its curling parish papers, and the iron ring of the door her husband owned, and she made herself breathe the cool churchy breath of the place, stone and old wood, and candle grease, and the ghost of lilies from some Sunday past, and she thought, whatever I decide in here, I decide it once, and there is no undeciding it, no more than there is unmarrying, whatever the Latin says. And from within the dim of the nave, from the shadow past the font where the light fell in one long dusty bar from a clear south window, the Duke of Ashworth's voice came out to her, low and unhurried and giving nothing away, and never had. "You came," he said. "I was not sure you would. Come in, Verity. There is a thing I have to tell you before you tell me yours, and when you have heard it, I think you will find that neither of us has the choices we walked in here believing we had." Verity set her hand to the cold iron ring, and stepped across the worn stone sill into the dark, and let the great door swing half to behind her on its ancient hinge, and went to meet him in the one bar of falling light. The church took her voice, and folded it small against the stone. Verity came up the aisle with her grandfather's courage, and her father's Greek, and her hand at her side, and stopped at the edge of the falling bar of light, where the dust turned slowly in it like something alive, and she did not step into the brightness. She kept the shadow. "You said there was a thing you had to tell me first," she said. Before mine. Tell it then. I have carried enough of my own today to have room for one of yours. The Duke stood by the chancel step with his hat in his hand, and the cold south light came down across him and made him grey all over, coat and eyes, and the road dust still in his hair. Behind him a marble tablet let into the wall bore the name of some earlier Ashworth in worn gilt, and a bunch of Sunday lilies had gone brown at the altar rail, and the whole place smelled of stone and candle grease and the green cold that Mrs. Pell had promised would hold February and July. He looked, for a moment, not like a man who owned the living, but like a boy who had been left in it. My father kept my mother 40 miles from him for 11 years, he said. Verity went still. You knew the shape of it. My aunt told you, you said. She would. She tells everyone the shape, and no one the middle. His thumb moved once along the brim of the hat, and stopped. The shape is that he cast her off in all but name, and kept her in the north, like an unpaid account. The middle is that he loved her. That is the part the family does not say, because it is worse than not loving her. He loved her, and he could not make the loving fit the arrangement his own father had built for him, the lands and the alliance and the great cold house, and so he chose the arrangement, and he put her in Northumberland, and he wrote to her twice a year, and he went grey doing it. I watched him do it. I was old enough at the end to understand what I was watching. Nathaniel, let me. It was not sharp. It was almost the low flicker of a plea. You gave me the whole of your silence in a garden this morning. Give me the length of this. She inclined her head, 1 degree, and the light moved on the dust. When I married you in March, he said, I did it because I wanted to, which is a thing no Ashworth in 4 generations has been able to say, and I have never said it aloud until this minute in this church. 3 weeks. You read Sophocles at me across the eggs, and I did not know how to answer you, and I told myself the not knowing was distaste. His jaw worked. It was not distaste, and that frightened me past any fright I have had since I was a boy, watching my father go grey over a woman he had shut in the north. Because I looked at you, Verity, and I saw the whole machine of my life reach out to make of you exactly what he made of her, a thing kept, a thing at 40 miles. A wife I could not let myself love in the manner she was owed, and could not let myself release either. And I would rather have unmade the marriage clean than do to you across 30 years what he did to her. So when my uncle came to me in May with a license that named the wrong parish and a door out of it all, I took the door. I told myself it was mercy. I told myself I was sparing you. The thunder that had sat behind the downs all afternoon spoke once. Far off, a low roll through the stone. Verity found that her hand had come up to the cold edge of a pew and closed on it. You did not spare me, she said. You understand that. You did not spare me 1 hour of it. I understand it now. He turned the hat once more in his hands, then set it down deliberately on the chancel step, as though putting away the last thing he could hold instead of her. I understood it the moment I stood in that street this morning, with Honoria on my arm, and could not find your name. A man who has spared a woman does not stand in his own village, unable to say what she is. I have not spared you, Verity. I have only done my father's whole crime in 4 months instead of 11 years, and told myself I had improved upon him by doing it quickly. She had come here braced for the flat grey shutter, for trustees and Latin, and the cool foresight of a man closing a wall. She had not braced for this. It was harder. She stood in the green cold with the brown lilies and the far thunder, and felt the careful architecture of her own resolve. The alone at the bottom of his county resolve, she had built stone by stone across 9 days. Shift on its footing. That is your thing, she said, when she could. Now say the rest. You told me at the gate we neither of us have the choices we walked in believing we had. Say why. Because there can be no annulment. He said it plainly, a man laying down a true weight. You know it already. You read the clause 4 times. I would stake the county on it. Issue voids the license's defect. A child of the marriage is proof of a marriage in the eye of any court in England. Wrong parish, and all. My uncle built the wall and cut a door in it he could not see, and this morning I watched a physician open that door on your front step. He looked at her, and the grey was not flat now. It was strained clear through, like ice with the current moving under it. So I cannot marry Honoria. Not because I have found my courage. I want you to hear that. I will not have you think me suddenly brave, but because the law will not let me. And I have spent the whole ride from your gate learning that I am glad of it, and ashamed to be glad, because it means the thing that freed me was your silence, and not my honor. You are glad, Verity said. I am glad. His voice broke on the second word, one hairline, the first crack she had heard in 4 months in the smooth grey surface of him, and he did not hide it, and that undid her more than any speech could have. God help me, Verity. I am glad there is a child, not for the heir. I have had every man from my uncle to the Marquess of Bedminster tell me for 3 years what an heir is worth in water rights and valley land, and I could not have cared for it less if they had valued it in turnips. I am glad, because it is yours. Because it means the thing between us in March was not a mistake I imagined, that there was enough of it, that there is a piece of it, drawing breath at the bottom of my county, that I very nearly rode away from forever without knowing. That is what I have to tell you. That I would have gone. And that I cannot bear, that I would have gone. The far thunder rolled again, nearer, and a wind came up outside and pushed the great south door another inch on its hinge, and the bar of light wavered as a cloud crossed the sun. Verity stood in the shifting cold and made herself breathe. Once, the way her father had taught her to breathe at the moment a blow arrives, but this was not a blow, and she did not have the shape of it, and her breath came ragged, where it had never once come ragged all this dreadful shining day. Now you, the Duke said. Lo, you told me in the garden I had not earned the standing to know why you kept it. I have spent the ride and this hour trying to earn it. Have I? Tell me the reason, Verity, not the plan. The reason. And she found, standing in the one place in England colder than her own resolve, that she had run out of stones to build with. Because I loved you in March, she said. The words went out into the stone and the stone gave them back, and she heard how they sounded, and did not take them back. I loved you across the breakfast things while you sat there not knowing how to answer me, and I thought, I was fool enough to think that I might be the one you learned to love, that I might be the exception to the great cold house. And then you did not watch long enough to notice, and your uncle found his wrong parish, and you came here yourself. Which was the cruelest thing you could have done, Nathaniel. Crueler than the solicitor. Crueler than the post. Because a man who does not care does not drive 2 days to do a thing a clerk could do by Frank. You came. And I understood that you felt something and had decided to master it, and that was worse than your feeling nothing. And I would not. Her voice bent, and held, and went on. I would not be a debt you paid. You swore never to keep a wife out of obligation. I heard you sworn it. So when the child came certain to me 9 days ago, I looked at your uncle's claws, and I saw the door, and I chose the one thing I could take without your leave. A life where I was not owed for. I would rather have raised your heir alone and unowed in this county than be the obligation you shut in the north out of honor. That is the reason. That is the whole of it. I did not withhold a weapon. I withheld the only thing I had left that you had not already taken or unmade, the right to not be a duty. The Duke crossed the space between them. He did not stride. He came slowly, into the shadow where she stood, out of the light, so that they were both grey now, both in the cold, and he stopped an arm's length off, close enough that she caught cedar and road dust under the church smell of stone and grease, and he looked down at her with his whole ruined, careful face open at last. You would not be a debt, he said, so you would have made yourself a ghost. At 40 miles, in a plain white box with a good staircase. Verity, you did to yourself, on purpose, in 9 days, the exact thing I have spent my life terrified of doing to a woman I loved. You put yourself in the north. She had not thought of it so. She heard it land, and had no answer, and the not having an answer was itself the answer, and she saw him see it. "I am not offering you a duty," he said. "I want that clear, in this church, where I will say it once and mean it under the roof I own. I am not standing here because there is an heir, or a clause, or an alliance that has broken, or a girl of 20 at my inn. I am standing here because I would have gone, and I cannot bear it. And a man does not fail to bear the loss of a duty. He fails to bear the loss of the thing he loves. I loved you in March too. I was only better at hiding it than you, having had 30 years more practice at hiding everything." The corner of his mouth moved, the ghost of the flicker, and it was wet at the edge. "It is the one skill my father left me, and I am glad, this once, to have spent it and have nothing of it left." The door boomed against the stone, not the wind. A hand. Verity turned, and the Duke turned, and down the long cold aisle in the last of the falling light came Lord Edmund Ashworth, snuff-coloured against the grey, his thin face set, and his leather case beneath his arm, and behind him, hesitating in the porch with her gloves twisting in her hands, Lady Honoria Vane. "Nathaniel," Lord Edmund said, and his voice went up hard into the vaulting, "you will come away from her. Whatever she has told you, you will come away, and we will settle this before the storm breaks and half the county is sheltering in this church to hear it." "Uncle," the Duke did not move from Verity's side, "you will lower your voice in my church. Your church. Yes, everything is yours. That is precisely the difficulty." Lord Edmund stopped 10 feet off, in the light, and his grey eyes went over Verity once, top to toe, the inventory, and arrived this time at a total that plainly alarmed him. "You have the look of a woman who has been telling a duke a great deal. And he has the look of a man who has been foolish enough to listen. Mrs. Weston, forgive me, I forget. You dislike the name. How far gone are you?" Honoria, in the porch, went white. "Edmund," the Duke's voice dropped to something Verity had never heard in it, quiet as the church and colder than its stones. "Have a care. I will have a care for this family, since no one else in it will." The old man's composure cracked at last, and under it was not cunning but fear, plain naked fear, and Verity saw it and understood in one stroke that she had read his clause correctly by candlelight, a man who had lain awake over an event before it happened. "Do you think I do this for pleasure? Do you think I enjoy driving 3 counties to argue Latin with a parson's girl? I watched your father go to pieces over a woman in the north for 11 years. I held the family together with both hands while he did it. The rents, the seat, the name, the alliances he let rot while he pined at 40 miles. I swore I would not watch another Duke of Ashworth do it. And here you stand, in the very church, about to do it before my eyes, throw over Bedminster, throw over the valley, throw over a marriage 3 years in the arranging. For a girl and a child that will bring this house nothing but a scandal it will be 40 years living down." "A child," said the Duke. "That is my son or my daughter." "A child," Lord Edmund said, "that was got in 3 weeks of folly and will be disposed of according to the direction of the trustees, which is a phrase, nephew, that I wrote, and which I wrote to give this family a way to keep the girl quietly, and the alliance whole, and the rest of it." Verity stepped into the light. She had not meant to. Her father's calm cold place had brought her this far. But it was not calm that moved her now. It was the thing that had woken her these 9 mornings before the grey, the thing that had put her hand flat to her middle in a garden full of hawks. She stepped into the falling bar of light, where they could all see her, Edmund and the Duke and the white-faced girl in the porch, and she was done with the shadow. "Say the rest of your clause aloud, my lord, in the church. Under the roof your nephew owns, since you set such store by roofs. Tell them what disposed of at the direction of the trustees means when it is written of a child, and not a chattel." I read it 4 times by candlelight. I read it a 5th by daylight, the way my father taught me to read the thing that matters, not for what it says, but for what its writer fears. And what you fear, my lord, so much that you built a wall against it 3 counties before it was ever conceived, is a living child of this marriage. Because a living child voids your Latin, a living child proves the marriage. A living child undoes Bedminster, and the valley, and the whole generations work in a single breath, and so you provided, in dry law, for it to be got out of the way. That is your standard provision. That is your care for the family. You did not build a wall to keep me out. You built a trap to spring on a child that had not yet drawn breath. The silence in the church was total. Even the thunder held. That is not. Lord Edmund began, and his voice was not smooth now. It is exactly what it is. The Duke came to stand beside her in the light, and he took the leather case from under his uncle's arm. Took it, without violence, the way he did all things, exactly. And the old man let it go, because he could not, before a witness and his nephew both, be seen to wrestle for it, and the Duke opened it on the chancel step and drew out the folded parchment of the settlement, and the smaller folded thing beside it, the special license with the wrong parish named, the last brick of the wall, the thing that was to have gone to the bishop at Marlow on Thursday. He held the license out to Verity. She took it. The parchment was stiff and cool and faintly greasy with handling, and the ink of the wrong parish stood black across it, and she turned it over in her own hand in the falling light, and read, at the foot, in a clerk's round, careful hand, the words by special license of the Lord Archbishop, and understood that she was holding the whole machine of her unmaking in her 2 hands, and that it weighed almost nothing at all. There is a candle, the Duke said, at the altar rail. It is lit for the storm. Verity looked at him. It is yours, he said. You have carried it 9 days. You will decide what is done with it, not I, and not my uncle, and not the trustees. It is the one thing in this that was only ever yours to decide, and I will not take it from you now, to make myself feel brave. She walked to the altar rail with the license in her hand, and the brown lilies going by, and the single candle burning steady in its iron stand against the coming weather. And Lord Edmund said, "You would not dare," in a voice gone thin, and Honoria in the porch made a small sound that was not distress, but something nearer relief. And Verity held the corner of the wrong parish to the flame. It caught, and curled, and the black ink went brown, and then gold. And she held it as long as she could, and then laid it burning in the empty iron arms dish, where 100 years of Ashworth pennies had lain, and watched the whole clever instrument of the annulment blacken and shrink, and go to a curl of grey ash that lifted once on the church's cold draught and settled. "There is no license to surrender at Marlow now," she said to Lord Edmund, in her father's quietest voice, the one everyone leaned to hear. "There is no defect to dissolve, and a child to prove there never can be. Your wall is down, my lord. You built the door yourself. I have only walked through it and pulled it off its hinges behind me." Lord Edmund Ashworth stood a long moment in the grey light. Then something went out of him. Not the fear stayed, but the certainty the fear had ridden, and he seemed, all at once, an old man in a snuff-coloured coat in a cold church, who had held a family together with both hands for so long he had forgotten it was not his to hold. "You will ruin it," he said. But there was no wall behind the words now. The alliance. The valley. Bedminster, said Honoria Vane, from the porch, may speak to me. She came up the aisle, twisting her gloves no longer, her young face steadier than any of them, and Verity saw that she had misjudged the girl entirely, that under the fresh, unhurried confidence there was a spine the equal of the room. "My Lord Edmund, you have arranged me for 3 years as though I were a water right. I came into this country to see what I was to be given, and I have spent 2 days watching a man who could not say the name of his own wife in his own street, and I am very glad, I find, to be given back to myself. Papa wanted the valley. Papa may have some other thing. I will not be the girl who was got with an heir to spite a child that was already coming." She looked at Verity, and her dark eyes were kind and clear. "You told me to open the east rooms. I hope you will open them yourself. They will want the light, with a child in the house." That was neatly done, Verity said, before she could stop herself, and heard, absurdly, Mrs. Pell in her own mouth, and Honoria laughed, the fresh kind laugh from the village street, and this time it did not go through Verity like a blade at all. Lord Edmund looked from the girl to the burnt ash in the alms dish to his nephew, and last of all to Verity, and he gathered the empty leather case off the chancel step with hands not quite steady, and he inclined his head to her, a small, stiff, unwilling thing, but real, the first honest motion she had seen him make. "You read the clause better than the man who wrote it," he said. "My brother's wife was clever too. I did not treat her kindly. I told myself for 11 years it was for the family." He paused at the edge of the light. "It was not for the family. It was because I was afraid. You may tell my nephew's child, someday, that its great-uncle learned that too late to be of use to anyone, and be glad it learned it at all." And he went down the long aisle and out through the porch into the first fat drops of the storm, and the great door swung to behind him and did not open again. The thunder broke properly then, overhead, and the rain came down on the church roof in a long steady roar, and the light went out of the south window as though a hand had closed it, and in the sudden grey the single candle at the altar rail burned taller. Verity, the Duke stood where the light had been. "I have burned nothing, and given up nothing, and I am not brave. But I am here, and I am not going to Marlow, and there is a girl walking out into the rain to give herself back her own life, and my uncle has gone into the weather, an old man, and none of it is why I am about to say what I am going to say. I am saying it because I loved you in March, and was a coward, and I love you in July, and mean to stop being one, and I would like, if you will have me, and not a duty, to marry you again in this church properly, with the right parish named, before a child that is already the whole of what I wanted, and never had the courage to know I wanted." Verity crossed the cold stone to him. She put the flat of her hand, the hand that had held the license to the flame, against the front of his dusty coat, over the place where his heart went unquiet under all that practiced grey, and she felt it going, hard and fast and afraid, the least ducal thing about him, and the truest. "I will not be kept in the north," she said. "I know it. I will read Greek at you across the breakfast things until you are an old man, and you will learn to answer, or I will marry you and pity you, and I have no talent for pity. I know that too." The flicker came up at the corner of his mouth, and this time it became, at last, after 4 months, the whole thing, not a smile the Duke of Ashworth permitted himself, but one that got away from him entirely. "Undignified, astonished, young, you will have to teach me. I have a fair head for a mortgage, and no head at all for Sophocles. I am told it is a family failing. It is your only one I can mend." And she went up on her toes in the roaring cold, with the rain coming down on the roof he owned, and the candle burning tall, and she kissed him, or he kissed her, and neither of them, afterward, could have said which, and it did not signify. They were married in the church of Ashworth Magna, a second time on a bright morning at the very end of summer, with the right parish named and the bands read 3 Sundays running from the worn stone porch, and the whole village in the pews to hear it, and the child a small certain roundness, now beneath a gown of pale amber silk, that Mrs. Pell had let out twice and complained about both times. There was no great company from town. Lady Honoria sent a letter and a christening cup ahead of the day, and married, that same autumn, a plain sensible naval man of her own, choosing whom her father came, in the end, to prefer to a valley. Lord Edmund did not come to the wedding, but at Michaelmas a small parcel arrived at Rookswood, and inside it, wrapped in silk, was a miniature portrait on ivory of a dark grave woman with the Duke's own grey eyes, his mother, that had hung 40 years in a house in the north, and a single line in a thin grey hand, for the child, that it may know the face the family did not treat kindly. Verity hung it in the east rooms, in the morning light, where the sun came in. They kept Rookswood. The Duke would not hear of shutting it. He said, in the one joke he made that whole golden autumn, that he had crossed 3 counties to be rid of a wife, and got instead a wife, an heir, a housekeeper who counted his faults without a window, and a staircase he was not permitted to alter, and that on the whole the annulment had been the worst piece of business his uncle ever transacted on his behalf, and he was grateful past speaking that it had failed. The child came at the turn of the year, as the tired physician at Marlow had promised, a daughter, small and dark and loud and entirely well, who came into a warm house full of fires and lavender and the smell of Mrs. Pell's baking, and was laid, clean and swaddled, and bawling with the good honest temper of the thoroughly cared for, into the arms of a father who had learned, at last, how to answer the thing he was given. He held her at the window of the east rooms in the pale January light, under his mother's portrait, and Verity, watching from the bed, with the Norwich shawl about her shoulders, saw the Duke of Ashworth's whole careful grey face give everything away, and give it away gladly, and never once think to guard it. "She has your temper," he said. "She has your chin. God help her." Verity held out her hands, and he brought the child to her, and the winter sun came through the opened east windows and lay warm across the three of them. "Mrs. Pell, the good cups, I think. His Grace will want tea, and this time he will drink it and eat the seed cake, or I shall know the reason." "I shall eat the seed cake," the Duke said, "if it is put in front of me," and sat on the edge of the bed, with his daughter's hand closed round one of his fingers, and did not, for a long while, ask for anything else at all. Down in the lane, the limes stood bare and black against the frost, and the honeysuckle was cut back hard for the spring, and the gate her grandfather had hung swung once on its ancient hinge in the cold bright air, and settled, and up in the warm east rooms a duke drank the tea his wife had poured him, in a plain gentleman's box of 6 rooms, and a good oak stair, and was, for the first time in his life, and every day after it, exactly where he wished to be. If you have ever kept something close and quiet, not to wound anyone, but because it was the last thing that was wholly your own, I think you will have understood Verity better than she understood herself. Stay here by the fire with me a while longer. Tell me in the comments the moment you knew he was hers, and subscribe for the next story, and I will keep the candle lit and the good cups down again.